Let me welcome all of you for live session on behalf of Shifra Society on occasion of Kargil Vijay Divas. I'm Nehal, your host today. We all who are on live today on Zoom and Facebook uh, think why Kargil Vijay Divas, right? Let me bring in some basic information before we jump into actual talk session. Kargil Vijay Divas, named after successful Operation Vijay, is celebrated on 26 July every year in honor of Kargil war heroes. Government of India responded to Pakistani military attack with Operation Vijay led by Indian Army with mobilization of around 2 lakhs Indian troops along with the conflicting line of Indian line of control that India shared with Pakistan. 527 soldiers from Indian armed forces lost their lives during the war and thousands were injured. The Kargil war was fought for more than 60 days and ended with India regaining control of all previously held territories, hence re-establishing the status quo. Let's remember those heroes today, their bravery, their valor, because of whom we are alive peacefully after the war ended and still continue to do so. Today we have online with us Lieutenant Colonel Sanjay Mishra, who was commissioned in Corps of Army Air Defense in the year 1987. Let me introduce Colonel Sir to all of you. During his 20 years long service career, he took active part in counter-insurgency operations both in Nagaland and Jammu and Kashmir for several years. He also held a prestigious appointment of Group Testing Officer at Service Selection Board, selecting the officers for Army. Colonel Sanjay Mishra was awarded General Officer Commanding in Chief Commendation Card on 26 Jan 2007 for conducting massive rescue and relief operations under natural calamity in Jammu and Kashmir. Colonel Sanjay Mishra took premature retirement in October 2007 and attended General Management Executive Program at IIM Indore. Since 2007, he has held multiple leadership roles with Genpact, IBM for eight years, which included leading infrastructure, logistics, security, training, and hiring the sourcing functions. Since last 5 years, he is working with Bridge I2I Analytics Solutions as a director, risk and infrastructure. He is currently based out of Bangalore. He is keen to volunteer to support social causes, and in last few years, he has conducted several sessions to motivate young students to join the Indian Armed Forces. Welcome to live session, sir. We all are looking forward to hear untold stories of war from you and about how Indian soldiers and officers are the mark of ultimate courage and bravery.
Thanks a lot, Nehal, for your kind words and introduction, and look forward, ready to answer queries.
Sure, sir. So let's start with the questionnaire that I have. I have big list of questions, but let's see how much we can cover in this session. So, sir, every student studying in school at least one sittings to join Indian Armed Forces, be it while singing a national anthem every day in school assembly, watching movies in like Border Uri, which I used to do in my childhood days, or just for sake of having opportunity to hold the real guns, right? So, how do you decide to join Indian Army? I mean, how could you think of that I want to do it, and how did you perceive it? Was it a well thought decision or happened accidentally?
So, Nehal, at the beginning, I would like to say that I don't come from a family which got a history of people joining the army. Rather, I am the first one from my family to join the army. But I lived my dream when the 71 war, when it happened in December 71, India got a astounding victory over Pakistan, created Bangladesh. 93,000 Pakistanis surrendered to the Indian armed forces. It's unparalleled in the history of world where such a large force has surrendered. So in 26 January 72, I had the opportunity to meet some people who have taken part in this war. And there was a function organized to felicitate them. I was a small child, was there, heard their stories, and got motivated and decided that this is the career which I want for myself in future. And some movies like Hakikat, the song of Hakikat, Kartelyam Fida, all those things, as you said, yeah, definitely they also had an influence on me. And to top it all, at the age of 9.5 years, I was sent to a school, Dholpur Military School in boarding. And there are 5 of them in the country, earlier known as King George schools. They were set up to train people from JCOs who are children from the army and some civilians and armed forces officers children to join the army. So I was there, and I think that's what got me into the army.
Yeah, I think it helps when you get the grooming from the school time itself, right?
Yeah.
You get all the trainings and mindset that you have to serve our nation.
Yes.
Right. So, during your tenure in Indian Armed Forces, did you get any opportunity, like to? I mean, I want you to share some your experience during the insurgencies that you and your battalion would have faced during your term.
Yeah. So Neil, I joined as you have introduced, I joined the Army Air Defense, and after completing 5 years of service, I was fortunate to get an opportunity to get posted to Assam Rifles, and the unit which I was posted to was located in Nagaland, and there was insurgency at its peak in those days in '92 when I got posted there. Assam Rifles, just to tell, it is the oldest paramilitary force of India, established by Britishers in 1835, and it has been there. It has taken part in World War One, World War Two, of Pavan in Sri Lanka, and in J&K also. But it is basically deployed in Northeast. They are known as Friends of Hill people. So I joined the unit in September '92, and I was very, very again fortunate that my induction into insurgency happened right in first 10 days of my joining the unit.
Mm.
So it is
Was
6th, 7th, night of 6th, 7th October,
was it scary or
92.
was it kind of opportunity?
Like it was an opportunity. Like I was like, once I went there and I was just trying to settle down, one fine evening we were called by a commanding officer, 3 officers, and each was given a team of 40 other ranks with some JCOs, and we were tasked. We had a hard intelligence of militants moving on a ridge line. There were a lot of villages on that ridge line, and they were collecting taxes. Like Nagaland militants used to run almost a parallel government there. They used to collect house taxes. So we got the intelligence that they are there. So we were told to move after last light. So then in the dark, we went walking close to the village. Intelligence that they are there. So we were told to move after last light. And once we cordoned the village, and we started house to house search to trace out the militants in that village. And maybe somewhere in after midnight, me along with one more officer and some men entered a house, and we were fired upon. And we also returned fire, and we could see one militant getting shot in the room which we have entered. But the firing was so heavy from other rooms that we have to rush out of that house. So we all came out of that house, tightened the cordon around that house, and then there was some exchange of fire. And two of our men then crawled close to the house, lobbed the grenades through the window into the house, and some more firefight continued. And after that, they again re-entered the house. And by the time the fire from inside the house had almost died down, and when we searched the house, we found another 2 militants dead. So overall, in that firefight, we killed 3 militants. Unfortunately, one of our own Jawan also got martyred in that gunfight, and we could capture a lot of arms and ammunition which was stacked in that house, as well as the tax which they have collected, which was amounting to 2,24,800 rupees. I don't forget that number because I counted that cash, and it was a huge amount in '92. And this incident was reported in those days in All India Radio, as well as the front page of national newspapers in Delhi. So I think I had a first experience of insurgency with thick firefight and one of the fairest encounter I've ever had. I thought, since you asked that question, I thought I must narrate it to it. It always comes into my mind. So I thought I must share it with you.
Yes, sir. It would have, I think, very engraved memory in your conscience that you will not forget it whole of your life because it was your first experience.
Yeah, and it could have been anybody's day. Like the bullet doesn't see who is it.
Yeah.
It could have been anybody's day, and we won that day, and we got success that day. So that's how it is.
Mhm. So let's get into Kargil story. It's not mere a story, but it is something which Indian armed forces and I think everybody as an Indian citizen should remember that it happened 29 years back, which because of which uh, so many army jawans and officers were lost. But here we are because of whom we are safe living a life. I think we should remember them today. So let's get into that discussion now. So, sir, we have enough information on what led to Kargil War. Like I was researching, I went through a lot of videos and Wikipedia. Actually, according to the insider like army insider like you, what led to war?
So, Nehal, I think there's a lot of, as you said, there's a lot of information available on the net. But as far as the facts which I know, uh, these were the heights which were dominating the National Highway 1, which connects Srinagar to Leh, and which is the lifeline for our troops who are deployed in Ladakh and Siachen Glacier and other parts of it. A lot of uh, logistics support is provided through this. And once these heights get occupied by anybody who's like Pakistanis, they could interfere into our movement of supplies to these forces and the movement of our troops also. So normally these are heights at the range of 16,000 to 18,000 feet, and there used to be heavy snow in winters. So people used to withdraw back to the lower locations since it was untenable at times to stay at those locations, and it was covered. So we never suspected anybody will come and sit over there. And I think Pakistanis in February, somewhere in February, they started moving from their side, coming up to these heights, using snow scooters, porters, and all, and establish themselves in these heights to dominate with the aim to dominate and cut off. That was their strategic aim to cut off the lifeline for Ladakh and other troop deployment. And somewhere in April, maybe after mid-April or something, the report started coming to us. I think initially it came from the civilians, some cattle grazers and all who move around in that area, in those areas, that they have seen some militant movement. It was not reported as a Pakistani army movement, but they have seen some militant movement in that area, and the strength was not known. I think immediately army got activated, and the process was started to ascertain what is there an intrusion, what is the intrusion, is that militants, is it Paki army. So all these things were getting ascertained, and I think a patrol went in the first week of May. Everybody knows about Captain Saurabh Kalia, and he made a supreme sacrifice, and we realized that there's a intrusion is large enough, and we need to act upon. And immediately after that, the mobilization was army was ordered, and army started mobilizing. And as you have named this program as like untold facts, so the untold facts, like people know about these stories of valor, what people did, and a lot of victory of Tiger Hill, victory of other is all there. But something like how difficult it was to mobilize, reach, and launched attacks on these things, on these places which were held by Pakistanis, as well as how difficult it was to sustain and maintain the logistics for this, to have these efforts of Indian armies supported. So I would like to touch upon a few points like that. When the mobilization started, the road was dominated since they were sitting on top and they could observe our movements. So road could have been dominated and was dominated by artillery fire. So we have to restrict our movement to night movement only. So the troop induction was restricted to night movements, and that too on the nights where moonlight is not there or the hours of darkness were used. But Indian Army very efficiently and very quickly mobilized, moved into these areas, and then they have to stage forward on foot to the places from where we can launch attack on these positions and carry out these successive operations. But now it was a lot difficult too, because these were the mountains which didn't have forest cover or natural cover there. In the daytime, everything was exposed, so we have to, in the daytime, hide behind boulders, and in the night time, we have to do our stage forwarding movements. And maintaining logistic support was also very, very difficult, because you cannot have food cooked at the places where troops are getting moving forward ahead to. So there in the rear areas where it is safe, we established cookhouses. Every day the food supply was supposed to be maintained and delivered. You cannot carry heavy loads because of lack of oxygen in those heights. Ammunition supply was supposed to be maintained similarly. So all those supplies were done on foot. It was a very tedious task, and things like fried chicken, aloo puri, all those things which can last long, were being 8 to 10 kgs weight per man was carried and being supplied. There were a lot of rivulets like the nalas which are there in the hills, and when the snow started melting in the daytime, they used to be with the heavy. There used to be high volume of water. It was difficult to cross those nalas also. So all these difficulties were there, but it is a professionalism of Indian Army, our soldiers, the dedication, the commitment, that they overcame all these things. Similarly, casualty evacuation in case was also a problem, because if you have to carry one man on a stretcher, four people can walk to a certain distance in those rarity of oxygen. So to evacuate one person, we have to move 12 people bringing the person down to the location. But everything, and then to attack the people, enemy sitting on the heights, in those heights where like walking without any load is also difficult. But everybody knows what Indian army is made of, the metal they showed there, and got victory for the country, I think. So I thought the
Yeah,
information is useful for you.
yeah, sir. It is. I mean, uh, we don't know what all things goes in while fighting a war. We just get the news from the media that okay, so and so soldier died, and so soldier from Pakistan side died, and we don't know the details, whatever details you have given right now. So it is very important for us to know okay, what all things goes in, how much things are taken care before actual the fight happens, right? Before how many things are gone into while in supporting the soldiers which are actually fighting the war. That those things are very important to know for us, is what I thought. So I wanted to know all these things. So now we want to know some very story which is very close to your heart. Some of your friends or any of your colleague went through it during the war. We want to know that personal story of yours.
Uh, so the first story which comes to my mind is of our course mate. He's Colonel Sonam Wangchuk, Mahavir Chakra, and he has been a course mate, a dear friend. I met him in November 2019 recently. Spent 3 days together in Lansdowne and in Uttarakhand area. So he's known as Lion of Ladakh, and he's a living legend. He was named by Prime Minister in his speech to the nation when he announced the abrogation of Article 370 and creation of Ladakh as a union territory. So he is the person who gave first success in the Kargil war to our nation. Like it was somewhere on 30th May when he did that deed of valor where he was awarded a Mahavir Chakra. So I will like to narrate a brief incident. It is known as Battle of Chorbatla. You can search it. You will find a lot of literature. There are video films also on that. So Sonam
I
was on
think it
leave.
would be more interesting, sir.
Yeah, Sonam was on leave, and Sonam was recalled as the army got mobilized. He was posted with Ladakh scouts, and he was tasked to occupy Chorbatla is a pass which gives passage, and it was used by King of Ladakh at times to attack adversaries. So that pass need to be dominated because it will prevent the Pakistanis from reinforcing the positions which were holding on top. So he was tasked to go on a height, on a ridge line, and occupy that ridge line, dominate that ridge line to prevent Pakistanis from going through that pass and reinforcing their troops. So that was the task which was given to Sonam's team. He moved ahead with a team around 30 people with few JCOs and other ranks. And then he staged forward 4 men along with a JCO to occupy a particular feature and establish an administrative base there so that they can further clear the ridge line. So when these 4 people moved up and when they reached the top where they were supposed to reach, they were asked to just carry out the reconnaissance of the area. And while observing, they realized that 4 Pakistanis are climbing up from the other side of the hill and they are well armed. So they waited for them to come within range and shot those all 4 Pakistanis. But while the firefight happened, their own position was given away, and there were other Pakistanis. There are 3 to 4 posts of Pakistanis surrounding that area, and they all brought heavy fire onto these 4 people who were there on top. Their radio set also got damaged, but they were lucky to pass on the message to Colonel Sonam Wangchuk. At that time, he was a major, that we need reinforcement, we need support. And he immediately organized his party, decided to move up to provide support to the men who were stuck over there. And when they started their movement, they were ambushed on the way. They were ambushed on the way because they were visible, they can be seen. And in that ambush, which lasted around 30 minutes of firefight, they lost one of their men. Sonam had to hide behind with his team, had to hide behind the boulders because it was daytime. They waited for the night to happen. They planned leaving one person with the fallen soldier. Rest of the team divided them into 2 groups. And they decided to outflank the Pakistani positions who were firing on them. They went from the sides in the night. They climbed almost vertical heights in those at 18,000 feet in the night, reached the top, and then launched the offensive. And they could vacate all the 3 to 4 Pakistani posts over a period of next 3 to 4 days, cleared everything, and then dominated that place for 14 days till the time other reinforcements came in. And for this act of bravery, Sonam got a Mahavir Chakra Two of the Jaisals got a Veer Chakra. And that was the first victory in Kargil war, which we got. And it's close to my heart because it comes from a course mate of mine. We are all very proud of him.
Yes, sir. We are also proud of him. Uh, my heart goes to all the soldiers when I listen to these stories. Sir, when he went with four of his junior commissioned officers, I want to know how many troops were there and uh, under them, and like what all difficulties they faced, because it was first war. I mean, part of the war where still the things, still the information was insufficient, right? And I mean, they must not be knowing how long it is going to go, how far is this going to go. So what was going through them? How did they manage? How
So I
many
told you,
soldiers were there and how did they manage it?
there were 30, a group of 30 people. Sonam had a group of 30 people. And they actually, when they started off, they were also not knowing how long it's going to last. I remember, I think Sonam's son's birthday is 11th June, and he moved out in the end of May, thinking that he might be back for his son's birthday. He was recalled from leave, and but uh, when they on 30th night this happened, and then they had to, then it was a long haul. As I said, it was 14 days more, and they always had a, initially they had a shortage of ammunition, as I heard from him, but then they could send back and replenish. They could evacuate the person the fallen soldier who got martyred, and but then he's with those only 30 men he sustained and dominated the British for 14 days. But after 14 days they got
One day.
and they were relieved from there, and they were relieved from there. But till 14 days, they maintained the complete dominance of the ridge line.
What was that place called as well? The place
Chor Batla, if you know, it's Chor Batla.
Yeah, I heard.
Chor Batla.
Yeah. So, um, sir, you were in Army Air Defense. Any such stories where you got opportunity to fire the missiles and gun bullets from your aircraft, and I mean any such opportunities that you got?
So honestly, during my tenure with Army for 20 years, I was at Army Air Defense for almost 14, 15 years. In between, I was at Assam Rifles, as I said. So definitely we got deployed, and we, during I think Kargil war only, I like to just say, when we were mobilizing at that time, uh, while we were preparing to launch offensive to recapture the place or the heights which were captured by Pakistani, but as an army, we were prepared to fight the war across the border, because if the Kargil conflict would have got escalated across the border and would have blown into a full-fledged war, our army was fully prepared. And at that time, there was a huge volume of firing which was happening on the line of control, and along complete line of control. It was a very heavy volume of fire which was exchanged those days. So 24th, 25th May, when the mobilization was happening, I was tasked to go and carry out the reconnaissance first of the forward post of line of control and deploy the L-70 or the guns of air defense, which have got a higher caliber, higher rate of fire. Like air defense guns fire, like a bigger gun fires at the rate of 340 rounds per minute, or a smaller gun which has got smaller barrels, but it has got two twin barrels. It fires at rate of 1,000 rounds per minute per barrel. So you can imagine the volume of fire it can bring about. So we decided to deploy those guns on the line of control to fire on Paki posts. So I was actually doing the recce in those areas which were there eyeball to eyeball. Like you can see across the river, there are Paki posts, you can see each other. And again, daytime you cannot move, do the reconnaissance in the night. And deployed the guns there, and we fired in ground role, not an air role shooting down aircraft, which is a primary role. So in my career, I didn't get the opportunity to shoot down the aircrafts, though I'm very proud to say my regiment in 1971 shot down two Sabre jets of Pakistan in Okha port in Gujarat. And we got two VRCs mentioned in dispatches in 1971 war, our by unit. So we are known as Sabre killers because we shot down the Sabre jets of Pakistan in 1971 war.
That is comprehensive. So, my next question is about the war. What happened after the war? Like, people all over the country knew that war is going on, and they were all in Josh. कि we are fighting with Pakistan and Pakistan is losing the battle. What was the perception that you are getting from media and from then the current government of that time, and from the people of nation?
So I think what I remember of those days was, as I told, I was moving along the axis of Puj, Rajouri, and down to Jammu and Pathankot axis, because my own subunits were deployed down below towards Pathankot, and I was doing this additional task of deploying the guns in LC. So I did a lot of journey, a lot of traveling up and down by road, and I'm very proud and I feel very happy to share this with everyone, that the amount of Josh which was there in all our countrymen, like I could not have traveled more than 10 kilometers without being stopped, offered tea, coffee, food. If you don't want to have, they will fill your vehicle with food. Any army movement, because that was the main axis from which army was moving, getting inducted for the war, or people were, ammunition was going up, whatever was going up, no one could have left any village. Across the road, throughout the axis, every village used to have a pandal placed there full of food, and no soldier was allowed to go without having something or the other, or having packed food kept along with them. So there was a tremendous amount of josh. The flags, tricolor used to fly all over those pandals. Patriotic songs were being played all across the road. So it was a feeling like it used to give that special josh to the people who are moving up for war. So that was, I think, the mood in the nation, and I think everywhere, all across the country, that mood would have been there the same. And the government in those times took, I think, some decisions which impacted the war. Was one was that we never wanted, as the government of the day never wanted, for various reasons. They must be having strong reasons for that, to get escalated into a full-fledged war. So that's why we were maintaining a lot of precautions of no air space violations. We were trying to keep our aircrafts on our side whenever we used our air force.
But it was a war situation, no, sir. We could have actually used the aircraft and just finished the war in, say, 2 3 days instead of 60 days. I mean,
Yeah,
as a civilian, I feel that why didn't we do that? We could have done that.
I'm see, whatever I could gather was like, it was, there must be a lot of international pressure on our prime minister or on our, to take that decision, because both were nuclear states, Pakistan and India. Nobody wanted the battle to snowball into a full-fledged war, not India but other forces in the world. And we had to like have the right diplomacy in place to finally twist Pakistan's tail to get them into submission. So I think that may have been the reason. I don't know what has been the reason, but we never, I think, as a country at that time, we have decided we will like to recapture those heights, but we will not wanted, or we did escalate into the war, full war, but we were prepared for that. And we were prepared to attack Pakistan across the border wherever we would have liked. So army was fully poised. We were all mobilized in that time and ready to attack.
Yeah. I mean, that is what always happens, right? We are ready for war. I agree. We are never underprepared. We are always prepared. But then always happens from the other side, and then we are in defensive mode. There's nothing wrong in being defensive mode, but then why don't we finish the enemy once for all?
I think that decision doesn't lie in our country with the army. That decision lies
Yeah,
with
I mean,
the
you
leadership.
would have got that questions being inside, no? Never?
Yeah. So it is like, as a soldier, as I say, when a soldier, we are not warmongers, or we don't seek war, and we all know war can be
Yeah.
devastating for everybody, for the family, for
But anyway, we are
everyone.
in war then. Anyway, war had infected.
But finally, this decision has to be a political, and there are multiple factors which are being considered onto that. There must be, so that may be the reason. So maybe when is the right time, army is given a go ahead, and we will do whatever country needs.
I know it's an organization and individual is not allowed to take decision, right? It comes from top.
Yeah, it has to be a political decision. This has to be a political decision, definitely not an army decision. Because our country is a democratic country. We are armies under the political leadership, and this decision of going out for full-fledged war or reoccupying or recapturing POK, anything which is going to be there has to come from the country finally.
So, what was the perception from local and international media? Like, did they? Uh, I know that a few international media they did not like the attack that happened, but then after the war happened, what was the perception? Did they take it in right way, or they just maligned the decisions taken by Indian government?
No, I think this war will be taught in world history, military histories, because the all Indian army fought against so many odds. We were not crossing LOC. We were not using air power.
All things.
And we fought this war, and there will be it will there is no parallel example in the world history, military history, of fighting at such heights and dislodging the well-entrenched enemy from these heights. It really needs a lot of courage, valor, exemplary leadership, which was shown by Indian Army in this war, and there will not be a parallel of that. So, like when we talk to, if you're talking of media or any media, when I mean serious media, who understand the warfare,
Yeah.
who know the warfare, not only just spreading news, I think they all appreciate the Indian Army for what we achieved in that war, which at some time looked unthinkable, and we achieved it within 2 months and 2.5 months. We achieved that. I think it is unparalleled in any history of.
But today, if you see, the media will ask why Pulwama, right? They will not understand ki it happened because of the other side. We did not initiate it. So those kind of media perceptions were not there that time. So media was also in support of armies. What you're saying?
Yeah, and I think during the war, if you have followed, somebody would have followed. There used to be a daily briefing by Director General of Military Operations every day in the evening of the progress of the war, and that was covered. And I think whatever in current scenario also, or wherever, like one should always rely on the official briefing of the army, because that is most authenticated. So in those days, media was reporting and there were reporters there, but not as much as, if anything happens today, there will be more. But DGMO was doing a regular briefing, and like it did in during when we did the surgical strikes, the Uri, you must have heard that. So there was a proper briefing by the DGMO of the Indian Army. And when Balakot happened, there was a proper briefing done by the air chief.
Right. So your previous answer, I had that this question arised in my mind. Uh, like how does soldiers survive in Siachen kind of environment where it's difficult even to breathe, right? Oxygen levels are so low, carrying so much load, reaching the top, and then defending the borders of nation. How do they manage? How it's difficult?
So I will just shortly try to in brief try to
Yeah.
tell you how does the induction happens and how people get acclimatized when they go up to glacier. Well, it is one of the world's highest battlefield. Heights are ranging to 21,000 plus. The Banatop is 21,700 feet high, and Everest is 27. So you can imagine okay, what will be the height, and the temperatures go down to minus 50 degrees centigrade. So any soldier who is getting inducted first reaches Thois, which is the base camp. Normally, people fly out from Chandigarh to Thois, and Thois they spend 2 to 3 days in the base camp where they do very light exercises and most of the time rest, and they get acclimatized to the low air pressure and the low oxygen levels in that surroundings. After that, there is a proper Siachen Battle School which has been established close to Thois. They all are moved there, and they spend good 2 weeks there, where they are firstly kitted, whatever equipment is needed to be there, whether and then the skills which are required to survive in these temperatures on these altitudes. They are fully trained for that. They are given training of rock climbing, mountain climbing, all those other things. Any clothing, equipment, shoes, special shoes, everything is given to them, and they're also trained how to avoid frost bites. HAPO is known as high altitude pulmonary edema, in which the water gets filled into the lungs and people are not able to breathe. So all those, how to avoid such type of diseases and injuries, they are all trained there. After that, again, the acclimatization doesn't finish here. Then they move to the first base camp or the first staging camp. It is a 1 day walk from Chechen Battle School, and the walk has to be done in the night because it is more difficult to walk during daytime when sun is out, because the ice becomes soft and it is difficult to walk through, and there are more chances of accidents in falling down in crevices when the ice is soft. And avalanches can also happen in this time. So they normally move in the midnight and reach the next point by 8 in the morning, and then they have breakfast, rest for that whole day, and next night again they move. And like this, there are 3 camps. So they keep on staging onto different altitudes, higher and higher, and getting acclimatized. And walking is very difficult, movement is slow. And once they reach the battalion headquarters post, after that, they spend a good amount of 20-30 days there, understanding the whole thing and getting fully acclimatized. And then they are staged forward to the posts again. Now there are certain posts which can have larger number of people. There are certain posts which can have smaller number of people. Now, how they are maintained is all the supplies are like through either helicopters. The choppers are used extensively to drop supplies for them. Food which they eat is all tinned food, which is high calorie food, which is already designed by the scientists, which is required to be needed at those places, like dry fruits and other things which are calorie value food is being supplied to them. And we employ snow scooters, we employ civilian porters to shift. Like kerosene oil is very important thing for them, because all cooking happens on that. Anything, and even if they have to drink water, they have to melt the ice. For that also they need kerosene, but they cannot use it much like for lighting or any other purpose, because firstly it is in short supply always. Like, it is a precious thing, whatever it is there. Then it burns the oxygen. Whenever anything you light a lantern and where you're sleeping, you will not be able to sleep, because oxygen, it will burn the oxygen. So people normally don't use it. And if supplies are dropped, and the choppers also cannot be there for long, because all these posts are under Pakistani observation. When a chopper goes, by the time Pakistani RT shell starts coming up where the chopper is likely to be there, they drop their load, pick up the people if they have to pick up, or any casualty has to be evacuated, and they go back. So it is a matter of 20-30 seconds they are there and they go back. They just hover around, drop the things, and go back. And people who are there, they cannot sustain for long in these altitudes, because, as I told, oxygen is very less. And so it is a time limit has been set after a lot of study by some medical specialists, that a person can be there for 27 days on such high as 27 to 30 days. After they complete their time over there, they are pulled back again down to the lower altitudes. And that is how they survive over there. Supplies, this is how they are trained and survive there.
Yeah, we can only imagine what they go
Yes.
through. But when the the soldiers who actually go through it would remember this experience for whole life.
Yes.
I assume every soldier has to go through the Siachen post once in their.
No, I know it's not everyone has to go through. So what used to happen is, like, it's like posts are being manned, and infantry battalion is there. But since it is difficult for people to stay longer, so there is a program in army. I remember my days. Now I have left army 13 years back. Something like this is operation is known as Op Meghdoot, and we used to get asked for volunteers. So officers, jawans used to volunteer to go to glacier, and once they are medically fit, physically fit, declared medically fit, all those tests are fit, then they are inducted into that, so that we get rotation and we can get the people down in time. One person doesn't spend more time in that area. So, but it is not mandatory for anybody to be doing a tenure in Siachen.
Sure. I would request all my Facebook viewers to ask questions in comments if they are looking for any answers from Karna sir. Um, so before we go to questions, sir, I can't let you go knowing your views and opinions about the current situation that is happening at China border. So throw some light on that. I mean, if you can.
I was thinking you should not ask this, but since you asked me, I think my
Sir,
knowledge also
everybody wants to know.
my knowledge is also limited to what is, I think, known by everyone, all of you. I also is now a civilian after retirement, and but I do keep a track of what I'm hearing, and with my military knowledge, what I feel is, you must have also heard and from the media that line of actual control is an imaginary line, and there is a difference of perception in certain areas between Chinese and Indians. We feel that this line is up to this point. They feel this line is up to this point. And so far, most of the disputed areas were being dominated by patrol. We have got a permanent post in permanent locations, but the area which were like where the perception difference was dominated by both the armies by sending patrols. Like, we heard of Finger Four and all. We keep on hearing. So Chinese used to come to Finger Four, go back. Indians used to go to Finger Eight and come back. So like this, we were maintaining, and everybody was just trying to tell, "Okay, yes, I feel my area is to this place," and they said they feel the area is to this place. Now, what I could gather is it has happened like Chinese have tried to come in slightly ahead, try to, like, instead of just coming and going back, they started staying in these areas or trying to stay in these areas. And that discussions are on between both the armies, like Corps Commander level talks are happening again. They are likely to happen. And what happened in Galwan was very, very areas. So, which is an aggressive posture by China initially did it, and India responded equally aggressively. So now the situation is diplomatic efforts are on, political efforts are on, and military efforts are on. And we hope to resolve it by discussions, and finally the good sense will prevail and de-escalation will happen. But in case the Chinese don't agree to de-escalation or they don't de-escalate, then rest assured they are in for bad times, because Indian army is fully prepared, geared up, and now they don't have experience of high altitude warfare as much as Indian army has got, and definitely we are going to give them a bloody nose in case if they try any stunt with us this time. So I think it should get resolved without further escalation and by talks. So that is what I feel at the moment. But yes, situation is there where both the sides have increased the presence of troops, have mobilized their forces, including Air Force, Navy, everything has got mobilized on both the sides. So the situation is tense, but everybody is trying to diffuse it. I don't think people will like to go in for war for this, and it will get diffused after
So
some time.
we are very proud of Indian armed forces, the way they have responded to the this insurgencies done by Chinese troops, right? We are very proud that how timely the Indian government has taken the decision to respond to them in the correct manner, so that they go back and don't stay there. Even if they have the perception of the line of actual control, uh, while patrolling, when we find them, how we can do it, right? How we can tackle the situations there. So the way Indian Armed Forces and Indian government has done, we are very proud of it.
Yeah, I think we have responded very, very strongly and very aggressively, which I think Chinese are not expecting. And they tried to ambush our people in Galwan, and where they lost much more people than what we lost. It was unfortunate, but they realized that it's not easy to tackle the Indian army now, and they also realize it. And I think there are signals from their side that they will withdraw. Only thing is, it's more of posturing at the moment, and we have given enough aggressive signals that we are not going to accept it, and come what may, we will push them back, and they will be back.
I would like you to tell us the story which you were telling me personally about your Haryanvi colleague who was taken after the war. He was injured.
Yeah. So
Please tell us that story, sir. We would like to go.
yeah, it was just like one of my friends. He was one of as a staff officer. He was in a brigade headquarters, which was launching attacks on Tiger and all. And where he was located, the casualties used to get evacuated and come there. There was an advanced dressing station. They were given initial first aid and then evacuated by Hapters or through ambulances to the rear hospitals. So one of the casualties from a JAT unit came, and the nursing assistant who was taking care of that casualty was also a JAT from Haryana. So when he put this person into the ambulance, he suddenly took out a bundle of BD. I think BD people will understand. It is being tendu leaf rolled BDs, which people have. He took out a bundle of BD and lit at least 5, 6 of BDs together and said, "Tau, लंबा कष्ट लगा, ठीक ठाक चला जाएगा, पहुंच जाएगा अस्पताल में, सब ठीक हो जाएगा." And then he took out everything, all other BD bundles which we had, 4, 5 of them, which he must have kept for himself, kept it along with him on the stretcher कि ये और रख दिए ताऊ, अस्पताल में जब मन करे तो कष्ट लगा लेना. And the ambulance left. My friend was observing. He called this nursing assistant. He said, "Why have you done this? Why have you given them 4 BDs to smoke all together and then given everything what you had to him?" He said, "Sir, to tell you the truth, I don't believe that he's going to survive even he will reach the hospital, the type of injury he has had." So in Haryana, everybody likes to smoke BD. And I said, if he's having to have his last breath on the way, let him have peacefully, at least having the pleasure of smoking a BD. And in case if he survives, which I hope he should, I have given him enough stock to keep him happy. That's what I think I could have done in this state where I cannot give him anything else. This is what I could have given him at this stage. So that is the like feeling of comradeship for one another in the army. So
Sir, that is what he could do that time, and he did. What do you think civilians should do when they hear of the stories or when they hear of war? How does the common civilian should respond to such kind of
I only think no soldier expects anything else from our countrymen. What he expects is a little bit of respect and assurance that in case if anything happens to him, his near and dear ones will be looked after. They will not be left to fend for themselves, whatever, because you're losing the person from the family. It cannot be fulfilled. It cannot be like, but what is expectation is what makes us feel go or any soldier to fight for the nation or go for the nation is different. But what if you ask if he is free, he or she is free, and they know that their development will be looked after, they will not be left to fend for themselves. I think that will really boost a lot of morale. And what I think She for Society is doing, you have picked up a very, very noble cause of supporting such people. I think that is what is, I think, will really help
ease of
anybody
life?
who has lost a relative in the family or got disabled or suffered any other type of injury during war.
Yeah. So I would like to take questions from Facebook Live now. There are a lot of comments welcoming you and saluting the bravery of Indian soldiers, Indian Army. Um,
Jai Hind to everyone who has commented. It's like real pleasure. It is very heartening people who join their work commenting, because to take out time on a Saturday afternoon and
I know, yeah,
was, I think it's hats
takes.
off to them, salute to them, and my thanks to all of them.
So Mukesh Saharan, he is asking to you, sir. His question is to you. What are the compromises made by family and contribution of his parents and his wife to his life, to the life of
Soldier, yeah.
or a soldier? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I salute all the women who marry a armed forces personnel or armed forces soldier or anybody, because it takes a lot of courage for everyone. Because life is uncertain. It can be like anything can happen to anyone anywhere, whether you're in army or whether you're not in army. But here, at times when you are away, like sacrifices are, a lot of postings are there where you cannot take your family. So your wife has to take care of your children and herself at a different place. The army has got a very well organized ecosystem where if you are in a separated family station of a place of choosing, your family will be supported. But everybody doesn't stay in those. There sometimes people stay in their hometowns and other places. So a lady really sacrifices a lot staying away from her husband and taking care of the children, their education. So it's a huge contribution. And because a soldier can trust his wife to take care of his children or his parents when he's not there, I think that gives him a lot of confidence. So I think the strength behind the soldier is the family, whether it's parents, whether it is wife, children, everybody. So everybody gets impacted when you are not there.
So I think, sir, not only the soldier is getting trained to live this life, even the family, wife and parents are getting trained to expect them to behave in certain way, reply to answers in certain way, and to uh, like I don't know, to respond to some situations in certain way, right? They are also getting trained from the day when they are with the soldier.
Yeah, once somebody gets married to an army personnel, whether it's now they are lady officers also, women officer, a husband gets married, he may not be in army, he may be or he may not be in the army, but everybody, I think, army is a family. Once you join the family, whether you are married to army personnel or whether you are yourself in the uniform, everything is a family. Then once you are there, you are treated as a family. You are always part there, and you get used to all the traditions, customs, because it's a different way of life altogether within cantonments, within the unit. So, and you're never like, I know for reasons, when I was in Nagaland, I was in Assam Rifles and we were allowed to, though it is a field postings for army, but since I was in Assam Rifles, which is a paramilitary organization, my wife and my child was there with me. And I used to be out on operations very frequently, moving into jungles, but they were never made to be felt alone by other ladies, children, other officers who were there. Like whenever I was not there or whenever you were out, they will be somebody is going to meet them, have a cup of tea with them in the evening, or they will be called to somebody's place. Somebody will ask, somebody will send breakfast to our house. So the belongingness, feeling of oneness, feeling of belongingness is there across the whole ecosystem. It's not only you, anybody who's part of a family also becomes the part of the army family. Everybody is respected and taken care of. Ladies are highly respected in the army. You enter a room, a woman, a wife, I enter a room with my wife, the senior most officer will stand up to greet that lady. That is what how the women are respected in the army. That is how we are taught to respect the women in the army.
Yes, sir. Uh, what do you think? Like, I heard that there is recent news that is coming out that even the women will be commissioned not only for short service commission but for permanent commission. Uh, Throw some light on that.
Yeah, I think it was a long-standing demand, and the court has given the ruling. Our women officers had to go to the court and fight for it, and they won from there. And now government has issued the notification 2 days back that all women officers are eligible for permanent commission. I think it's a very, very welcome news, and congratulations to all women
Yeah.
and all women officers who are there. And I have served with women officers because when I was there in my unit, I had women officers. She's married to my unit officer only. Her husband commanded a AD unit. She's also in AD, and now I think she will also be getting a permanent commission. So it is. I'm very happy for all the women, and congratulate them for this, and look forward for the more contribution from them going forward.
But infantry is still long seek dream, is it?
So I think that everywhere the ceiling has to be broken. So like in Air Force, it happened. Women started flying fighter jets. Earlier, they were not flying fighter jets. They were flying transport planes and the helicopters only. Now they are flying fighter jets. Similarly, it will happen in the army only. It's a matter of time. Any change takes some time, and so it is a matter of time. I think we will see our women leading our men in across the border, going for a surgical strike, leading a surgical strike for us.
Yeah, I think we all will be proud to know that women is not. Women are not behind men in any way. Even at the borders, they can go and fight for nation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I'm just looking for if there are any more questions. There's a comment from Pavitra Sridhar. She says, "My heart goes out for those army insurgents who sacrifice their lives."
Thanks,
All the
Pavitra.
comments are appreciating the Indian Armed Forces um, efforts at the borders, and
I think I just remembered like
yeah,
since we are talking and we're talking about leadership and we talked about Siachen and we talked about Kargil War. There is a motto which is known as Chetwood motto, which every army officer swears by when he gets commissioned. So I thought I must just tell that motto here for your viewers.
please
That is
do it.
the safety, honor, and welfare of your country come first, always, and every time.
Yeah.
Safety, honor, and welfare of your men, whom you command, come next, always and every time.
Mm.
Your own comfort, safety, and honor come last, always and every time.
Mm.
And that is what is the motto for which every army officer lives throughout his service career.
Yes, sir. I think even if the civilians adopt some 20-30% of it, uh, it will be great for this nation, sir.
It's like I would like to like say that She for Society is really doing a great work. Remembering those people who laid down their lives 21 years ago, those 527 people, and thousands of them who lost their limbs or who got wounded during the war. I think it's a whatever you're doing for them, it's great work. Hats off to you people that you have thought about it. It's very thoughtful of the Shifor Society to thinking about it, felicitating those people, and trying to remember those people, pay our salute and respect to those people who have given their today for our tomorrow. Today we sit and talk like this, as you said in the beginning. I think we owe a lot to those people, and our salute to them always. Jan, we remember them.
Yes, sir. Tomorrow we will be doing the program of felicitating one such RB Jawan family uh, who had sacrificed his life for the nation. And also there are a few more programs, and one more session is there tomorrow. Uh, similar session. We'll be talking with Colonel Gautam Kaur. So that's all I have for now. Sir, I want your uh, last thoughts on this session and for audience,
I think
mainly for audience.
first of all, for the audience, I think, as I said, I don't know what is the number of the audience. Can you tell me today how many people are there around? Like, otherwise, anybody who is
I could
taking.
see it had reached 38 to 40.
So all those people who have taken out time, I think, hats off to all of you, salute to all of you. Thank you for taking out time for this noble cause. It is very, very noble. If you think about it, you are just respecting those people who have given their everything for this nation. So it's so heartening to have so many of you, and your comments appreciate your feelings. And once again, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to be part of this. And She for Society, as I said, it's not only this thing which you're doing. Since I've gone through your page and I saw you've done a lot of hard work during COVID times also. You have distributed rations, medicines to the needy people. I think you people are doing a tremendous job, and hats off to you, all of you. And I can only say, wherever you need my support or help anytime in future, I am at a phone call away. Just ping me, give me a call. I will do whatever best I can do to support your cause.
Yes,
Thanks,
sir.
everyone. Thanks a lot to everyone. Thanks, Neil, for just
So I have one more question from
putting me in a spot.
yeah. No problem, sir. We will always be behind you for such supports through She for Society.
Okay,
So I
thank
have
you.
one more question. I don't want that question to remain unanswered. That is coming besides the central government compensation for armed forces, other than Gujarat state government, no state provides the compensation. Why is that?
So I don't think that's true, because every state has got its own norms. I remember a case of Karnataka itself recently. There was a martyr's wife. She's unfortunately she's just passed away last week, I think. She was in Manipal hospital, and Karnataka government gives a piece of plot of land to the martyrs who belong to Karnataka, apart from other monetary things. And our MP, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, and Meghna Girish is the mother of one of the martyrs, Major Akshay Girish. They both worked very hard, spoke to the government, and before that, we lost that Veer Nari. She was given the papers for the plot, which was supposed to be given by Karnataka government to them. So I know very for sure that all state governments have got, but the compensation is different. Like, they have got the norms, and there are very old norms. Some states have revised, like in the case of Colonel Santosh Babu recently in Telangana state has revised the whole thing. So every state is like providing something or the other. It may be varying from state to state. I don't have a correct information, but as per my knowledge, every state has got something for the martyrs or for the soldiers who get injured in war. They give, or and gallantry award winners. So every state gives something or the other. I don't know exact amount what it is. I think, but I still see soldiers are not more about money, or like no soldier thinks about money ever in his life. It is more about the respect and just taking care, giving him this due when he's back out of uniform to the society. I think that is what matters. That's what you are doing is more important. Recognizing them for what they have sacrificed rather than money. I think money is not very important for any soldier.
Uh, One question from Saptesha Chakraborty. He wants to ask, did Captain Saurabh Kalia and his team get justice in real life through any convert ops? Keeping in mind the ordeal he and his team had got through.
Yeah, it is a point. What he's saying, I agree to him. Uh, Still now, I think we are fighting in the International Court of Justice, because there is Geneva Conventions. Like, if you have captured somebody, or even if you get the mortal remains of someone, like you get the bodies of people like soldiers, there is a Geneva Convention, the way it should be treated with respect, because the soldier has fallen for a country, whether, and Indians have always done that. There are enough pictures. Very interesting thing. I will take 2 minutes to just tell.
Yes.
When it is about Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, it's all on net also, you can find out. When we had those 93,000 prisoners of war in India, Sam Manekshaw, as people know, he landed up in one of those prisoner of war camps, and called the Subedar Major. Subedar Major is like a commanding officer for men in the armed forces units. He called the Subedar Major of Pakistani army. He tasted the food, what food they were eating. Then he asked them, "Okay, Subedar Major साहब, आपका खटमल तो नहीं है जिस चारपाई आपको सोने को मिला है, मच्छरदानी लगा हुआ है, मच्छर तो नहीं काटता है, खाना कैसा मिलता है, हाइजीन ठीक है कि नहीं है जो आपका वॉशरूम्स वगैरह है सब यूज करता है." He checked everything from the Subedar Major.
Who thinks for the enemy so much, sir?
And then what the answer of that Pakistani Subedar Major was, he said, "साहब, अब मेरे को समझ में आ गया कि इंडिया क्यों जीतता है और पाकिस्तान क्यों हारता है."
Oh.
सर क्यों? कहता है क्योंकि आप फील्ड इतना बड़ा जनरल होके, चीफ ऑफ आर्मी स्टाफ होके एक सूबेदार मेजर से आके पूछ रहा है, वो भी दूसरे कंट्री के सूबेदार मेजर से, कि सब कुछ ठीक है, हमारे यहाँ ऐसा नहीं है साहब. That is what is all leadership is all about.
That tells the story, right? And the thing that happened with Saurabh Kalia, no Indian can bear it. And we are hoping that he gets the justice.
Yes, and there are certain organizations, I am also connected with these organizations who are fighting for that justice, and we're trying to push this case through and get justice for him. Nothing can like get whatever has happened, but at least we should get justice for him, I think.
Okay, that's all questions we have. Thanks a lot sir for coming online for us and sharing your insights in India about Indian Army, sharing the stories, untold stories. We didn't knew any of this. We have heard the names few here and there, we have read, but some untold stories of your friend and your colleague. Thanks for letting us know, sir.
Thanks again, once again. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to thank all the audience who have joined today. Stay tuned. There is one more session tomorrow. And also there will be a felicitation live program. Shifa Society will be felicitating the one of the Indian Army martyred Jawan family. So please come online tomorrow as well. Thank you. Thanks everybody. Kavita, can you give me host?
Yeah, just give me a minute.